Welcome back to the show. Today I'm really excited because I'm joined by someone who brings incredible insight to a topic we don't talk about often enough, and that's grief. Not just in the traditional sense, but grief that shows up when we change, grow, and lose parts of ourselves along the way. So today I have Tammy Adams with me. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Absolutely. What we do just marries together so well. Yeah.
hmm And so Tammy is a grief recovery specialist. And when people hear the word grief, they often think of death.
Yes.
How do you define grief in the context of transitions and health changes?
So I think that's a really good place to start. So we all have a common definition of what grief is before we start this conversation. So I
hmm
think that's really good. And I think when I kind of talk about the five kind of base reasons that trigger grief, I guess, I think it will make sense in how those same things apply to transition, to health, to education. It's right across the board. So you're right. Most people think of death. Some people think of divorce or maybe the breakup of a romantic relationship.
hmm
But there's actually over 40 reasons why we grieve. And some of those can actually be happy choices we've made that we know are in our best interest. So, how can they be grief? Well, grief is an emotional loss of any kind. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more today. So, I'm not
hmm
going to go into that one. The second one is a conflicting emotion that comes up from a change in something that was familiar. So that very much applies to those happy occasions. You know, we accept a promotion, we move away, we get married, we have a baby, but yet there are conflicting emotions that come up around that. There's all those things that we wished had been better, different, or more. There's our unrealized hopes, dreams, and expectations. And the other thing is things left unsaid.
hmm
So things maybe we said when we had the opportunity, but we didn't think people heard us. Things we didn't say when we had the opportunity. And then sometimes things we just need to say again, only this time with someone listening. So if the listeners can kind of embrace that really broad definition of grief, I think that will help them to be more open to the conversation that we're about to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting too, because I was reflecting on some things that I went through in my own life, knowing that we had this episode coming up and especially in terms of family stuff that I dealt with at a younger age, there were definitely things that were left unsaid that I wish I would have said differently. But also in terms of health related stuff, because most of the listeners know I went through a journey with MS and diagnosis, and there was definitely a period in my life where I looked back and recognized that I'd played a part in that. And that can be a really emotional thing to go through because it's like, holy crap, all this time I thought this was happening to me, but it was actually something that I contributed to it. And that can be one of the hardest conversations that I have with clients, but it's also so empowering
It is. It
because
is. It absolutely is.
it gives you this understanding, okay, so if I did this, I can fix this. But then there also can be a lot of grief around that. Like, I can't believe I did this to myself. And I didn't recognize that at the time, but thinking about it now and looking back, it's like, wow, okay. If I had known that there was an opportunity to address that and get support along the way, it would have been a very different journey, right?
It would fast tracked it as well, right?
hmm
And I think that's one of the most empowering things about the grief recovery method is we park right and wrong in the corner, which makes it so easy for us to say, okay, that's my stuff, that's your stuff. Now, how do I complete this? And I've been doing this myself since 2016. And now it's so easy to break it into those categories. Okay, what's yours? What's mine? And then to deal with it. But it's interesting because my background is early childhood education. So I taught nursery school for 20 years. And one of the things they taught us in college, which has come full circle with this grief recovery method, is when you teach a child, we've all heard it. You made your dad so angry, or you make me so angry. when you word it that way, the child learns very quickly that they are responsible or have power over someone else's emotions,
Yeah.
right? So now take that premise and bring it forward to grief recovery. If I say, kind of what you were saying, but let's use a different context, you know, when you do that,
Hmm.
you make me. There is no way to reclaim that power that's been lost. You
Yeah.
gave it away. You gave it away freely. But when you hold them accountable, when you said that, I felt, so now you're owning the reaction,
Hmm.
but then you take steps to complete it, not only to forgive them or whatever step needs to be taken to release them, but then you can also say, apologize to yourself for giving away that power. As soon as you place it in a way that you own it, you take it back. And that's how you become whole. But you're right. As long as it's this, there is no way to take that power back. You've freely given it away.
Exactly. That's like a perfect example or perfect kind of metaphor for what I was just talking about. And it's the feeling that something outside me caused me to have the health problems that I was dealing with. And so then something outside me was responsible for fixing it.
Right.
And so I had a lot of blame. I blamed the universe, I blamed God, I blamed my parents, I blamed medicine, I blamed blah, 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 blah. There's a big long list. And also, it was like, I'm waiting for them to come up with a cure, and nothing will get better until they do that. And that was giving, like you said, was giving my power away completely. And so taking ownership and responsibility of that, of like, okay, I caused this. Yep, that's a little bit, hurts a little bit, but then it's like, this gives me this freedom to be able to choose differently and make
Yeah,
different changes. And a saying that I heard recently is like, if you're not changing it, you're choosing it.
absolutely. And that's what people don't understand.
Hmm.
You know, if they take no action at all, they have made a choice. If they take action and, okay, that didn't work, let's try something new, they've also made a choice. And I think when you really embrace that premise, you're no longer able to stay in victimhood. You just can't because you always have choices. And if it's a health issue, because that's what we're dealing with right now, yes, those steps may help you to get better.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Maybe they won't, but what will change is your state of mind. And that is huge, regardless of where this journey takes you, because it gives you that feeling that in spite of the situation, you do still have some control.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And another kind of obstacle that, I mean, I'm talking about my own health journey, but it paints a picture for people to see, okay, so how does this relate to me? So
Yeah,
this could be MS, this could be anything from a health perspective that you're dealing with. This could be relationships, this could be work, this could be, as Tammy said, there's multiple different areas where grief comes up for us, and we may not even recognize it. But something I also found interesting. So I discovered that this was my responsibility and started making changes for myself. And then I didn't realize getting into that I was changing as a result of it. And with change, personal change comes change on the outside. So your environment changes, your people that you're surrounded with change. I got kicked out of every MS support group that I was in because all of a sudden I was not one of them. And so that can be very hard. It's like, holy crap, I thought these people were my friends. This is my community. And you don't realize the things that you are actually getting from the position that you were in before that you're going to have to get or give up or let go of to be able to move forward with your health. And knowing that that's okay is such an important thing for people. But like, what's an overlooked example of grief that people experience from your perspective when they're getting healthy?
well, I think that one that you just touched on is really, really important because there is an identity
Hmm.
that goes with that illness. And I'm going to step away from grief recovery for a minute. I'm just going to go into a mindset piece because it is relevant to this. So I did mindset training years and years ago, and this changed everything for me when I realized I have control. Like
Mhm.
it just changed everything. So you form these neural pathways in your mind, right? And they become addictive as cigarettes, as alcohol, as food, whatever. So the first time you have, say, an experience where you're sad, your body goes, oh, that's sad,
Mhm.
right? And then you have another experience that's sad, and it goes, oh, I remember this. That's sad. And now every time you have a sad experience, it starts to form this neural pathway that creates this addiction to wanting to feel sad. I know this sounds crazy, but there's all kinds of science that proves this, right? And so remember that melancholy feeling, you're just kind of feeling sorry for yourself. Like it just feels like a warm blanket, even though it's not comfortable.
Mhm.
What I learned was if you start replacing that sad feeling with an emotion you want, so say happiness, your body goes, oh, that's happy. And then you have another happy experience and it goes, oh. And then it starts to form a new pathway that creates an addiction to happiness. And what happens with the sadness is it atrophies. And so
Mhm.
now you're addicted to being happy. And so the universe, whatever you want to refer to it, it starts to bring these in. Now, there's another layer to this if you bring in the grief recovery to this mindset piece. And that's when I was doing the training, one thing that didn't really sit well with me was you take a negative experience and you replace it with a positive one. Okay, that's just a replacement thing. And the negative one showed up for a reason. So my belief now is give it a voice, recognize it, see if it has a message for you. If there's healing involved, absolutely take that step. If there's not healing, if it's just an acknowledgement, we'll give it that voice for a few minutes. Now, flip it to what you want. It's a subtle difference, but it's a huge difference because that negative voice doesn't have to keep turning up the volume in order for you to hear it.
Mhm.
And there's one more element to this that kind of fits in. And that's when we met in a networking group, right? And people used to say to me, it was kind of a holistic group. People used to say to me, you'll have the same lesson over and over and over, or the same experience until you learn the lesson. And it just never sat with me because I'm like, I'm over here singing Kumbaya, right? And yet it's kind of like, bam, why can't I get this? Well, now bring in the grief recovery method. When you start to look at these losses, you see there's a pattern.
Mhm.
That pattern is not missed lessons, it's missed opportunities for healing. And once you do the emotional inner work to heal those wounds, you stop repeating the same experience. So I know that I apologize. That was a really long answer, but all of that was so relevant to what you
Yeah,
said.
I agree. I agree. And so, like, I know we've talked before about how even when good things happen, there can be grief because the person, you have to let go of the person that you were, the person that you thought you were going to be, like from an experience perspective. So, around someone getting healthy, how can grief or how do you see grief showing up there?
Well, we talked about it before we came on here, the fact that you really have to grieve the old you to actually step into the new you. But again, it comes back to this sense of identity and what are we getting out of this? If it's a health issue, we are usually in survival mode, and we usually have been in survival mode for a long time. And many of those things that allowed us to stay alive, well, as we start to heal, they no longer really are useful, I guess, for a lack of better things. Sometimes we have the awareness, like you did, to say to yourself, what am I getting out of this? And if I use my own life as an example, um, I'm estranged from my parents.
Hmm.
And so one of the things I had to ask myself, if I don't heal, what am I getting out of this experience? Well, every time I shared the experience, people felt sorry for me. And then they wanted to help and they were so nice and they were so kind. And then I suddenly realized, oh my gosh, if I don't own this and resolve this emotional wound, I'm just sharing the same story over and over again. And people are feeding that neural pathway, that
Hmm.
addiction of I was a victim in this story and oh, poor me. And you're right, it's the hardest question you'll ever ask yourself because if you really allow the honesty to come through, it's there, you know.
Yeah.
Um, Recently, I shared this story. It's taken me a long time to share it publicly, but I am now. And I was offered a job at a company, and my potential boss said to me, I don't like you and I don't want you here, and I'm being forced to hire you.
Wow.
And who would say yes? And yet I was all over it. I'm like, okay, sure, kind of thing. And, they told me that they had also created a job for the person they wanted in the job, and they started the same day I did.
Hmm.
Again, who would say yes, right? Then for 6 months, it was roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And because of my personality, I kept finding a solution. Again, not a good thing. And I could go on and on with examples, but what I learned in the process was two things. It could never have hurt me if I hadn't said yes. So it comes back to that ownership piece. I said yes. I
Hmm.
took the job. And then the second piece that I learned was why did I take the job?
Yeah.
Well, I took the job because I had no value, in my opinion, unless it came from an external source. And he was very open and honest. He said he didn't like me, he didn't want me there. And somewhere in my wounded past, I needed to fix this.
Hmm.
I needed him to like me. I needed to earn his respect, which is why I took the job. Now, fast forward, having completed the grief recovery process and been in a different place, today, if I was in that position and was offered a job the same way, I would simply say, thank you. Thank you for being so honest. I
Yeah.
think I'm fine, let you hire who you want. But the difference is, if I had said that the first time without having dealt with the emotion behind it, I would have felt yucky. I would have felt like I sold out. I would have felt like I compromised. I would have felt all kinds of awful things. My heart would have been racing. My stomach would have been flipping. But today it would just be thanks, because working through all this stuff, regardless of where the wounds come from, empowers you to reclaim your confidence and your self esteem. And you can validate your own worth without having someone from the outside to do it. And even though that example wasn't health related, I think when you're in a chronic long term situation, you do need that external validation because you just feel so beaten up and you can't get answers and you can't get anyone who can really point you in the right direction. And so you fall into wanting people
Hmm.
to validate your sense of purpose or your sense of worth. And without grieving those emotions, without grieving how you got here in the first place, it just keeps you stuck right where you are.
Yeah, actually, you touched on some really interesting stuff there from a concept perspective because a lot of the women that I work with have been so gaslit by doctors in the past or told, I mean, I went through this. This isn't MS related, but I remember going to the gynecologist because I had no period for 5 years. That is not normal.
No, it's not.
It was kind of nice at first, but I was like, something's not right here. So I went to this highly regarded gynecologist and she ran all the tests as they always do. And she's like, your labs are normal. Maybe it's all in your head. And so you get to the point where it's like, I just want someone to acknowledge that I'm not crazy, that
Yes.
there's actually something going on. And then when they finally do and they take this label and they're like, oh, for me, MS, let's put you in this box. This box isn't a solution for you. This box means we can put you on these medications. And but when you're chasing that for a really long time and all of a sudden someone finally acknowledges that you're not making stuff up, that you're not crazy, it's like, oh, the label, we can hold on to it and wear it. And so stepping out of that can be really hard too, because like you said, it's an identity piece and there's so much connection to it. I mean, as I mentioned, I got kicked out of the support groups. That's attention. That's belonging. I got a lot
Yep.
of attention, like you did. Oh, poor Tammy, about
Yeah.
the family related stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's like you get attention, you get belonging, you have an automatic out to be able to not have to do the hard things. I remember one time because I was a retail, well, I was working to be a retail manager when I was diagnosed. And I remember one time I had a week where I didn't meet my sales targets. And my boss like came down on me a little bit. And I was like, oh, I was just having a really bad MS week. I was not happy with myself after that, but I had this out and it felt icky. But it's something that, you try it once and then you try it again, and then eventually you're not pushing yourself to your potential and to the things that are possible for you. And it can be like a cycle that's hard to get out of. But you do get a lot of benefit, that's secondary gain or secondary benefit that's associated with a health problem. And so when you start to step out of it, you're going to lose those things. And
You and you just touch on something. I love how we bounce off each other because
yeah,
it's like, oh, wait, you just made me think of something.
amazing.
Um, One of the things we talk about in grief recovery are STIRBs. And STIRBs are short-term energy relieving behaviors.
Hmm.
And they're normal and natural when we first experience a loss because, you'll have a rush of excess energy or a huge energy drain. But these STIRBs give you something else to think about. So shopping, sex, drugs, gaming, TV, working, all kinds of things. Anything we can do to distract ourselves. And when you said that, going to the doctors and trying to find the answer, that also can be a stirb because we keep looking and looking and
Hmm.
looking, looking, right? And it's a way of distracting ourselves from the current situation because we're looking for that next fix. And I think you and I talked about that a couple of weeks ago, like, oh, okay, so now this is coming to an end. What's the next thing to do, right? Kind of thing.
Hmm.
And so if you have no awareness of that, or you're really stuck in this, I don't know how to get well, that stirb, go back to those neural pathways again, forms another addictive pathway of trying to find the answer. And I remember a client coming to me once and they were really distraught over the death of their dog. And the dog had been sick for a short length of time, but it kind of advanced really quickly. And what brought them to me more so than the death of the dog was the anger towards the vet that it had taken so long to figure out what was wrong that then there was nothing they could do, right?
Hmm.
So as we unpacked their relationship with the dog and we really processed all of the wounds, like the emotional wounds associated with how much they loved this dog and how sad they were it was gone. Well, what's really interesting is when you get to the end of the process, you still don't have any answers, but the need for the answers has now gone away,
Hmm.
right? Through the healing process. Now, that doesn't mean you don't hold people accountable for their role in the story, but the healing allows you to stop the why. Why did this happen? And we've kind of brought this up a couple of times during this conversation, right?
Yeah, which is interesting, right? Because it's like what you're chasing might not actually be what you think it is. It may just be something under the surface that hasn't been addressed. Like I'm stepping more into using NLP with people in the mindset side of things. Because I mean, with my own journey, I thought for a really long time that nutrition was what, like, I've been symptom free since 2016. And it's been 20 years since I was diagnosed. And so for a long time, I thought nutrition was the thing that saved me and was the big change. Yes, nutrition was a part of it for sure, but it started with the mental shift because it started with recognizing that whole cause and effect that I mentioned. I lived in effect for a long time and waiting for the knight in shining armor to come and rescue me and looking for the right doctor that was actually going to help me. I had like five different neurologists. Um, and just you can kind of keep chasing that. But when it was like, oh, shoot, I played a part in this, that was the change. That was when the change started to happen because I was like, what can I do to help myself get better versus just waiting? So yeah, very interesting because how many situations is that present that people aren't even noticing and recognizing? And medicine's not going to say to you, you don't need to be here ever,
No,
right? So,
yeah. Think it's that honesty piece that is so important. Like reclaiming your health, reclaiming your finances, reclaiming any part of your life that
mhm.
seems to be lost. It comes down to that honesty piece. And the hardest part of the honesty piece is accountability. Accountability for ourselves. And yes, holding other people accountable for whatever choices they've made that have affected us or vice versa. But you've got to own your own journey, right? And I think that's what concerns me so much about where we are as a society right now. No one is willing to assume responsibility for their own success. They just kind of sit in an armchair and watch TV and wait for the next answer to be presented to them.
Mhm.
And that does keep us all in a victim, kind of a sense. So maybe this message, if nothing else, people hear from this is no, you need to be your own hero because no one's coming to save you, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And from that note, is there anything that you could recommend for people who are going through like a healing journey, a health journey, some sort of grief related situation that could help them move forward? Like, we're going to share your details so they can get in contact with you if they want to learn more. But what's something that you could share with people that they could find hopefully useful?
Well, there's a few things they can take, few initial steps they can take. And the first thing is an awareness, like just being aware. And what are those stirs that you're engaging with to distract yourself? And then why are you engaging in the stirs? Like, what is it that you are trying to distract yourself from? So, the first thing is awareness. Second thing is what distraction techniques are you using? We've kind of touched on it, realizing that it's our responsibility to move forward on this journey. Um, Being really aware of not pushing those emotions down, allowing yourself to be with them. And probably one of the easiest ways to do that is to journal because it's a safe place, it's private. It allows you to see what's showing up. And then it also allows you not only to give it a voice, but to practice saying it. And of course, you've got to be honest in that process. The next thing is depending on what it is you're dealing with. So let's say it's this health journey, maybe creating some kind of a document, whether it's uh, maybe it's a journal, maybe it's a memory book, maybe it's just a document, but writing things down so that you can actually see this because we kind of loop and loop and loop
Yep.
over the things, right? So, kind of getting a visual where you can actually see this. And then when you're ready, reaching out for professional support because, working through your grief, working through these negative emotions, it can be so hard to step into that observer's role You almost need a guide, kind of like, when you're climbing a mountain, they've already climbed it. So now they can
Yeah.
show you the safest route to get there. Um, but I really have come to believe that when it comes to grief and you work with someone who really can guide you through that process, not only do you save time, but you also save money and you can fast track so many areas of your life because you kind of get out of the quicksand, you get out of the mud, and you're kind of standing on the shore, kind of going, okay, where do we go now? You know, so there's a few things. Oh, and I forgot the other one. Find a friend who is willing to just listen, not fix it, not offer advice, no judgment. We all need that safe place to just be able to say, can you just listen?
Hmm.
And, like I say, not try to fix it, just listen. So I think, if I was to summarize all of that, awareness becomes the biggest place to begin because society has taught us to push it aside, bury it, don't deal with it. You don't have to. It's not important. It's selfish. It's self-centered.
Yep.
It's your ego. And yet that's the farthest thing from the truth because when we heal, we show up different and we become a different partner, we become a different um, parent, we become a different employer, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely true. And it's like for men as well, but especially as women, it's most of the people that I work with, it's like you're putting everyone else before yourself. And it's so important to make sure that we take care of ourselves as well. I mean, it's such a like cliche old saying, the like, who do you put your oxygen mask on? We put yours on first kind of thing. But even from the perspective of look around you and the whole you can't pour from an empty cup. How many empty cups do you see walking around? There's so many. And making sure that you do things for yourself and pay attention. And yeah, no, this has been such a deep conversation today. And I hope that everyone's really gotten some good value from it. And if you know anyone that is dealing with stuff and you think would benefit, like please share this with them as well. But if you are looking to get in contact with Tammy, where's the best place people can connect with you?
I'd say there's two. They could go to my website, which is tadams.ca. It's not a sales website. It's a resource. Like there's blogs and ebooks. There's all kinds of references. If they want to dip their toe in the water, there's also a questionnaire that they can take to see if they are carrying grief. And there's 21 questions. And we believe if you answered yes to one, that you usually have lots of hidden grief that you're not aware of. Most people who work with me usually say yes to 6 to 12.
Okay.
So, it's an awareness piece. And another way to get me is through my email at tdadams@rogers.com.
Perfect. And I will share the links to connect with Tammy in the show notes, but it's good to hear where you're active because I know you're on Facebook and Instagram and other places as well. So the website is the best place. Good to know. And it's great to hear that there are free resources. And I love that you shared that like if you answer yes to one question, because if there's 21 questions, right? It's easy to go on and be like, oh, that's, I only answered one. So it's good to hear that that's a part of it, even if you answer yes to one. There's often underlying stuff. So, thank you again so much for being here today. It's been a pleasure to talk with you as always. We've done an interview before, and I just thought that the connection to health was such a powerful thing that we had to connect again. So, thank you again for being here.
Thanks
And
for
wonderful. And everyone, thank you for listening, and we'll check you on the next episode.